Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. If you're a fan of true crime, psychological thrillers, and stories that keep you on the edge of your seat, then you're in the right place. Before we dive into today's chilling narrative, a story so unsettling, so meticulously crafted, that it left an indelible mark on the American psyche, I have a quick request. If you enjoy this kind of content, if you appreciate the effort that goes into bringing these complex tales to life, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button below. Your support means the world to us and helps us continue creating more compelling stories like this one. Don't forget to ring that notification bell too so you never miss an upload. Now, grab a warm drink, dim the lights, and prepare yourself. What you're about to hear is not for the faint of heart. This is a story of darkness, of a meticulous evil that stalked the unsuspecting, leaving a trail of terror and unanswered questions. This is the saga of the Obsidian Weaver. The year 2008 dawned with a crisp, optimistic chill across the United States. Economic murmurs were beginning to stir, a low hum beneath the surface of everyday life, but for the most part, communities in the Heartland still clung to a sense of security, a belief in the inherent goodness of their neighbors. It was this idyllic, almost naive backdrop that the first thread of terror was woven, seemingly out of thin air, into the fabric of a small, forgotten town in rural Illinois. Harmony Creek, with its population of just under 7,000 souls, was precisely the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked, where children rode bicycles freely until dusk, and where the biggest scandal usually involved a misplaced prize-winning pumpkin at the annual harvest festival. Nestled amongst rolling cornfields and bordered by the languid flow of the Little Wabash River, Harmony Creek was a picture postcard of Americana, a place that time, it seemed, had gently overlooked. And then came the night of May 12th. Sarah Jenkins, a vibrant, ambitious 23-year-old, had just moved to Harmony Creek 2 months prior, drawn by a job offer as a junior architect at a small local firm. She rented a charming, if slightly dilapidated, bungalow on Elm Street, a quiet tree-lined lane where the loudest sounds were usually the chirping of crickets and the distant lowing of cattle. Sarah was a creature of habit, a routine-oriented individual whose daily schedule was almost clockwork in its precision. Every weekday, she'd wake at 6:30 a.m., jog for 30 minutes, prepare a healthy breakfast, and leave for work by 8 a.m. Her evenings often involved reading, sketching designs, or video calls with her parents back in Ohio. Her life, by all accounts, was unremarkable in its wholesome simplicity, which made what happened to her all the more unfathomable. On the morning of May 13th, when Sarah failed to show up for work, her colleague, Mark Jensen, initially thought little of it. Perhaps she'd overslept, or maybe she had a sudden illness. But by 10 a.m., a gnawing unease began to settle in. Sarah was meticulous about informing her workplace of any absences. He tried calling her cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. He tried her landline, a relic she kept purely for nostalgic reasons. No answer. A quick check of her social media showed no recent activity. It was then that Mark, a cautious man by nature, decided to drive past her bungalow on his lunch break. The scene he encountered was subtle at first, almost deceptively so. The front door was ajar, not wide open, but just enough to suggest it hadn't been fully closed. A single potted geranium, Sarah's favorite, lay on its side on the porch, spilling a small mound of earth. His heart beginning to pound a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Mark hesitantly pushed the door open further. The air inside was heavy, still, and possessed a faint, metallic tang that he couldn't immediately identify. The interior of Sarah's bungalow was, to Mark, chillingly ordered. There were no signs of a struggle in the living room, no overturned furniture, no broken glass. Her books were neatly stacked. A half-finished cup of tea sat on her coffee table next to a novel, its bookmark carefully placed. It was as if she had simply vanished mid-sentence. But as Mark ventured deeper into the small home, guided by an instinct he couldn't articulate, the subtle signs of disturbance began to manifest. In the kitchen, a single cabinet door was slightly ajar, exposing a row of spice jars. In the bedroom, the bedspread was pulled back, but the pillows remained perfectly fluffed. It was in the bathroom that the true horror revealed itself. Sarah Jenkins lay in the bathtub, fully clothed in the nightwear she had likely been wearing when the attack occurred. Her eyes, wide and vacant, stared up at the ceiling, reflecting the dim light from the small window. There was no water in the tub. The precise cause of death was not immediately apparent to Mark's untrained eye, but the unmistakable crimson stain on her nightgown, soaking into the pristine white porcelain, told its own grim story. The metallic tang in the air now had a name: blood. Mark Jensen stumbled out of the house, his stomach churning, and frantically called 911. The dispatcher, accustomed to calls about runaway pets or minor fender benders, struggled to comprehend the urgency in his voice. Within minutes, the quiet Elm Street was transformed into a chaotic tableau of flashing blue and red lights. Sheriff Tom Hadley, a man whose 40 years in Harmony Creek had prepared him for everything from barn fires to the occasional bar brawl, but never this, was the first law enforcement officer on the scene. His weathered face, usually creased with friendly smiles, was now etched with a profound sense of shock and disbelief. The initial investigation was a flurry of activity, a desperate attempt to catch up to an event that had already transpired. Crime scene technicians, forensic pathologists, and detectives from the Illinois State Police converged on Harmony Creek, their presence an almost alien intrusion into the town's quiet existence. The small local sheriff's department, utterly overwhelmed, found itself relegated to crowd control and logistical support. The preliminary autopsy results, delivered with a somber gravity by Dr. Evelyn Reed, the state's chief medical examiner, confirmed Sarah Jenkins had died from a single, precise stab wound to the heart. There were no defensive wounds on her body, no signs of a prolonged struggle. This suggested a sudden, overwhelming attack, or perhaps an assailant she had known and trusted enough to let her guard down. The lack of forced entry was also a critical detail. Either the door had been unlocked, or the killer possessed a key. Sexual assault was ruled out. The killer had left behind surprisingly little forensic evidence. No fingerprints that didn't belong to Sarah, no identifiable trace DNA, and only the faint impression of a specific shoe size and tread pattern near the back window, an area Sarah rarely frequented. It was as if the perpetrator had materialized and then dissolved back into the shadows. The news of Sarah Jenkins' murder ripped through Harmony Creek like a wildfire, igniting a fear that had been dormant for generations. Suddenly, unlocked doors seemed like an invitation to death. Children were kept indoors, and the usual evening strolls ceased. Neighbors eyed each other with a new, unsettling suspicion. Who could do such a thing? And why? The days bled into weeks and the weeks into months. The investigation, spearheaded by seasoned state police detective Robert Maxwell, a man known for his tenacious pursuit of justice, hit brick wall after brick wall. Maxwell, a tall, gaunt man with a perpetually tired but intensely focused gaze, pored over every detail, interviewed every acquaintance Sarah had made, re-examined every piece of evidence. He found nothing to suggest Sarah had enemies, no disgruntled ex-lovers, no shady dealings. She was, by all accounts, a perfectly ordinary young woman leading a perfectly ordinary life. And that was perhaps the most terrifying aspect of all. Then, 3 months later, the fear escalated. 80 miles northeast of Harmony Creek, in the slightly larger, but equally unassuming town of Fairview, a similar tragedy unfolded. This time, the victim was Thomas O'Connell, a 56-year-old retired history teacher, known for his gentle demeanor and his love for tending his rose garden. Thomas lived alone in a cozy Victorian house on the outskirts of town, a bachelor who spent his days reading and volunteering at the local library. His body was discovered by his younger sister, Martha, who visited him weekly for Sunday dinner. She found him in his armchair, a history book open on his lap, a faint smile still gracing his lips. But the serenity was a cruel facade. Thomas, like Sarah, had been stabbed once precisely and lethally in the chest. Again, there were no signs of forced entry, no defensive wounds, and a meticulous lack of forensic evidence. The scene was eerily similar. The undisturbed nature of the home, the victim seemingly caught off guard, the singular, brutal wound. The only notable difference was the subtle placement of a single, perfectly woven, black silk thread on Thomas's chest, nestled amongst the folds of his shirt. It was so fine, so delicate, it could have been easily missed. Detective Maxwell, now with a grim certainty, knew they were dealing with a serial killer. The geographical proximity, the method of killing, the lack of motive, and now the almost signature-like silk thread, it was too much to be coincidence. The media, sensing the terrifying scope of the crimes, erupted. The Harmony Creek Killer became the Obsidian Weaver, a name coined by a particularly dramatic journalist, referring to the black silk thread left at the second scene and the meticulous, almost artistic nature of the killings. The public was gripped by a mixture of horror and morbid fascination. Who was this phantom killer? And why were they targeting seemingly random, innocent individuals? The FBI was called in, deploying their top behavioral profilers and forensic specialists. Special Agent Eleanor Vance, a brilliant and notoriously meticulous profiler, was assigned to the case. Vance, with her sharp intellect and an uncanny ability to delve into the darkest corners of the human psyche, quickly identified key patterns. The killer was likely male, highly organized, and intelligent. The lack of defensive wounds suggested a surprise attack, perhaps even a victim who trusted the killer, or who was rendered incapacitated swiftly and silently. The precise stab wound indicated a killer who was calm, practiced, and intimately familiar with human anatomy. The absence of sexual assault suggested a motive not rooted in primal urges, but in something far colder, far more calculated. Vance posited that the killer derived gratification not from the act of killing itself, but from the planning, the execution, and the sense of control. The undisturbed crime scenes, the almost theatrical staging, suggested a killer who wanted to leave a specific message, or perhaps, simply to prove their own mastery. The black silk thread at the second scene was particularly intriguing. Was it a calling card? A taunt? Or something more symbolic? The profiling painted a chilling portrait. A killer who was likely a social chameleon, someone who blended seamlessly into society, perhaps even charming and outwardly normal. They would be methodical, patient, and probably derived immense satisfaction from outsmarting law enforcement. The choice of victims, a young, aspiring architect and an elderly, retired teacher, seemed random. Yet Vance believed there was a connection, a hidden thread that only the killer understood. It wasn't about who they were, she theorized, but perhaps what they represented, or simply their vulnerability at a specific moment. The panic spread beyond Illinois. Towns across the Midwest, and then across the country, felt the chilling tendrils of the Obsidian Weaver's reign of terror. People double-locked their doors, invested in security systems, and eyed strangers with renewed suspicion. Local law enforcement agencies were inundated with tips, many of them baseless, fueled by fear and conjecture. Every shadow seemed to hold a potential threat, every creak of the floorboards a harbinger of doom. Detective Maxwell and Agent Vance worked tirelessly, forming an unlikely but formidable team. Maxwell, with his street smarts and deep understanding of small-town dynamics, complemented Vance's academic rigor and psychological insights. They established a joint task force, bringing together resources from multiple agencies, determined to stop the Obsidian Weaver before he struck again. But the killer remained elusive, a ghost in the wind, leaving behind only fear and the chilling, perfectly woven, black silk thread that seemed to mock their every effort. The first threads of the Weaver's tapestry of fear had been meticulously laid, and the pattern, though still obscure, was beginning to take shape, promising a much darker, more intricate design to come. The United States held its breath, waiting for the next horrifying stitch in the Obsidian Weaver's deadly masterpiece. The relentless pressure on the Obsidian Weaver task force grew with each passing day. News channels ran endless segments, dissecting every detail, speculating on motives, and showcasing the grieving families. The public, initially terrified, was slowly morphing into a collective beast of frustration, demanding answers, demanding an arrest. For Detective Robert Maxwell and Special Agent Eleanor Vance, the weight of expectation was almost suffocating, but it only fueled their resolve. They knew the killer was still out there, meticulously planning their next move, and they had to be quicker, smarter, and anticipate the next twist in the Obsidian Weaver's macabre design. The third victim surfaced 4 months after Thomas O'Connell, in the sprawling urban landscape of St. Louis, Missouri. This time, the geographical leap was significant, challenging Vance's initial assumption of the killer operating solely in rural Illinois. Maria Sanchez, a 30-year-old vibrant artist and part-time barista, was found in her loft apartment in the city's bustling arts district. Her landlord, noticing her absence from her usual morning routine of watering her balcony plants, entered her apartment with a spare key after receiving no response to his calls. The scene, for Maxwell and Vance, was an unsettling echo of the previous two, yet with distinct urban nuances. Maria, like Sarah and Thomas, was found in a seemingly undisturbed setting. She lay on her studio floor, surrounded by her unfinished canvases, a palette knife still clutched loosely in her hand. Her vibrant, eclectic apartment was otherwise immaculate, her paintbrushes cleaned and neatly arranged, her art supplies meticulously organized. The killer had, once again, left no sign of forced entry, no defensive wounds on Maria's body. The cause of death was the same, a single, precise stab wound to the heart. And there, nestled delicately in the strands of her dark, artistic hair, was another black silk thread, identical to the one found on Thomas O'Connell. The St. Louis Police Department, initially treating it as an isolated incident, quickly connected it to the ongoing series of murders. The media frenzy reignited with a terrifying intensity. The Obsidian Weaver was no longer confined to the quiet Heartland. He had breached the urban fortress, proving his reach and his audacity. The public's fear escalated to a near panic. If no one was safe, then who could be next? Agent Vance adjusted her profile. The geographical shift was significant. It suggested the killer was highly mobile, perhaps had a job that required travel, or was simply adept at blending into different environments. The choice of St. Louis, a major metropolitan hub, also indicated a killer who was confident, perhaps even enjoying the challenge of operating in a more densely populated area with higher surveillance. The victims, now an aspiring architect, a retired teacher, and a vibrant artist, still defied any obvious connection based on demographics, profession, or social circles. Vance believed this randomness was intentional, a deliberate act to obscure any simple motive. The common thread, she increasingly felt, was something far more abstract, perhaps a symbolic representation that only the killer understood. He's evolving, Vance stated during a tense task force meeting, her voice calm but firm, or rather, he's expanding his canvas. He's showing us he's not limited by geography, nor by the victim's social standing. What connects them isn't immediately visible, but it's there. He's choosing people who, in their own way, embody a certain essence. Sarah, the builder. Thomas, the historian. Maria, the creator. He's making a statement or perhaps constructing something. Something invisible to us. Maxwell, ever the pragmatist, pressed for more tangible leads. But what about the physical evidence, Eleanor? We're still coming up empty. No fingerprints, no DNA. This guy is a ghost. Vance nodded, her gaze distant, as if seeing beyond the present. That's part of his signature, Robert. He's meticulous, perhaps even obsessive. He plans every detail from entry to exit to the removal of evidence. He's either wearing full protective gear, or he's developed an almost superhuman ability to avoid leaving traces. The silk thread, however, is a deliberate choice. It's not an accidental transfer. It's an offering, a signature, a taunt. We need to find the source of that thread. Forensic analysis of the silk threads yielded some fascinating, albeit frustrating, results. They were indeed identical, a specific grade of high quality, unbleached black mulberry silk, extremely rare, not commonly available in retail stores. Its specific weave pattern and dye composition suggested it might have come from a custom order, or perhaps a specialized supplier catering to niche markets, like high-end tailoring, theatrical costuming, or even ancient textile restoration. The task force began the arduous process of tracing every possible source of this unique silk across the country, a needle in a haystack endeavor that promised to be lengthy and largely fruitless. The profiling team, led by Vance, began to delve deeper into the killer's psychology. The precision of the stab wounds, always targeting the heart, suggested not just anatomical knowledge, but a symbolic act striking at the very core of life, perhaps even love or passion. The undisturbed crime scenes, the almost reverent placement of the victims, and the lack of overt violence or disarray indicated a killer who felt no rage or hatred towards his victims. Instead, there was a chilling sense of detachment and almost clinical approach. This wasn't personal. This was a project. He sees himself as an artist. Vance proposed during one late-night session, her voice hoarse from hours of discussion. He's weaving a narrative, a tapestry. Each victim is a thread. And the black silk, that's his mark, his signature on his masterpiece. He's not just killing people, he's crafting a statement. And the statement is about control, about power, about the ability to dictate life and death, to erase and to define. Maxwell's skepticism was evident. An artist who murders? That's a stretch, Eleanor. Is it? Vance challenged, her eyes flashing. Think of the most disturbed artists in history, the ones who pushed boundaries. He's pushing the boundary of human cruelty, not for bloodlust, but for a warped sense of aesthetic. He wants to create something profound, something lasting, through destruction. He's meticulously designing these deaths, almost curating them. The undisturbed settings, the specific placement of the victims. It's all part of his art. The task force launched a massive public awareness campaign, urging anyone with information about the black silk thread or anyone acting suspiciously to come forward. Hotlines were inundated with calls, but most led to dead ends. The sheer volume of information was overwhelming, and the killer remained one step ahead, a phantom moving through the shadows, always out of reach. A significant breakthrough, albeit a small one, came from the St. Louis crime scene. While no usable fingerprints were found inside Maria's apartment, an astute technician noticed a faint, partial print on the outside of her balcony railing, high up on the 5th floor. It was a partial palm print, barely visible, suggesting the killer might have used the balcony for entry or exit, perhaps scaling the building or accessing it from an adjacent roof. The print was too fragmented for immediate identification, but it offered a new avenue for investigation. It suggested a killer who was physically agile and audacious. Vance revised her profile. The Obsidian Weaver was likely physically fit, possibly with a background that required agility or specialized climbing skills. This added another layer of complexity. Was he a former athlete? A construction worker? Someone with military training? The possibilities, while narrowing the field slightly, still left a vast ocean of potential suspects. Maxwell, frustrated by the lack of direct leads, turned his attention to a more traditional, grassroots approach. He began revisiting the first 2 crime scenes, speaking to locals, re-interviewing neighbors, focusing on the minutiae that might have been overlooked in the initial panic. He had a hunch that the killer, despite his meticulous nature, might have left a subtle ripple in the small communities he first targeted. In Harmony Creek, he re-interviewed Sarah Jenkins' landlord, a gruff but observant older woman named Agnes Miller. Agnes, initially dismissive, suddenly recalled something. "You know," she mused, her eyes distant. "A few weeks before Sarah, there was a fellow always driving by, slow-like. Real nice car, dark blue, late-model sedan. Said he was looking at real estate, but he never stopped at the for-sale signs. Just drove by Sarah's place, real slow, a few times a week. Always around dusk. It was a slim lead, almost negligible, but Maxwell's detective instincts flared. Did you ever see him stop, Agnes? Or talk to anyone?" "No, never. Just driving by. And he had a funny way of looking. Not creepy exactly, but like he was watching, observing." This detail, previously dismissed as an idle curiosity, now took on a terrifying significance. The killer had likely been casing his victims, observing their routines, studying their vulnerabilities. This reinforced Vance's profile of a highly organized, patient perpetrator. The dark blue sedan was a start. They cross-referenced all reported sightings of similar vehicles in Harmony Creek and Fairview in the weeks leading up to the murders. Thousands of cars fit the description, but a handful had been noted in both towns. It was a painstaking process, but it was a thread, a tangible lead they could follow. The pressure intensified even further when, 6 months after Maria Sanchez's murder, the fourth victim was discovered. This time, the horror unfolded in a seemingly impenetrable fortress, a gated community in suburban Atlanta, Georgia. Dr. Eris Thorne, a renowned astrophysicist, was found in his expansive home office, surrounded by his complex equations and star charts. He was 59, a recluse by nature, passionate about his work. His wife, who had been away at a conference, returned home to find him. The scene was, by now, horrifyingly familiar. No forced entry, no struggle, a single precise stab wound to the heart. And another black silk thread, this time draped elegantly over a copy of his groundbreaking paper on dark matter. The geographical leap, from the Midwest to the Southeast, shattered any remaining illusions that the killer was constrained. The Obsidian Weaver was now a national nightmare. The profile continued to sharpen. The killer was clearly highly intelligent, capable of infiltrating high-security locations. Dr. Thorne's victimology added another dimension. A brilliant scientist, a seeker of universal truths, Vance's theory of symbolic victims gained more traction. What did an architect, a historian, an artist, and an astrophysicist represent together? What narrative was the Weaver constructing with these disparate lives? He's choosing people who represent the pillars of human endeavor. Robert, Vance explained, her voice low with a chilling realization. Creation, understanding, knowledge, memory. He's targeting individuals who contribute to the fabric of society, who weave their own threads into the grand tapestry of human experience. And he's cutting those threads. He's erasing them, and then replacing them with his own. The partial palm print from St. Louis was finally cross-referenced against a new database of unsolved break-ins and assaults across the country. A match was made. Not to a killer, but to a seemingly minor incident 3 years prior, a high-end bicycle theft in Seattle, Washington. The thief had been identified through surveillance footage but never apprehended. The individual was a former collegiate rock climber named Julian Thorne, no relation to the astrophysicist. A man with a clean record, a degree in applied mathematics, and a sporadic work history in various construction and odd-job roles that allowed for significant travel. Julian Thorne. A name, finally. The pieces began to click into place with terrifying speed. His educational background could explain the meticulous planning and anatomical knowledge. His rock-climbing background explained the agility and the possible balcony entry in St. Louis. His transient work history explained his mobility and ability to blend in. And the bicycle theft, a seemingly petty crime, showed a disregard for property and a willingness to operate outside the law. The task force, revitalized by this tangible lead, began a deep dive into Julian Thorne's life. They uncovered a history of extreme introversion, a brilliance that bordered on arrogance, and a profound sense of disillusionment with society, as evidenced by cryptic, philosophical musings found in his old online forums, often discussing the fragility of existence and the illusion of purpose. He had lived briefly in Harmony Creek years ago, working construction on a new school. He had a sister who lived in Fairview. He had attended an art exhibition in St. Louis just weeks before Maria Sanchez's death, and he had spent a summer working on a remote scientific outpost near Atlanta, assisting with structural analysis. The common thread was not just the silk, but him. He had been subtly present in the lives of his victims, observing, planning, weaving his deadly intentions long before the final, brutal act. The dark blue sedan, Agnes Miller's observation, it all fit. The hunt for Julian Thorne became the singular focus of every law enforcement agency in the country. Warrants were issued, and a national manhunt was launched. The media, given a face to the monster, exploded with details of his life, his chilling intellect, and his disturbing philosophy. The Obsidian Weaver was no longer a phantom. He was a man, a highly intelligent, deeply disturbed individual, who had been hiding in plain sight, meticulously unraveling the lives of others, one thread at a time, to weave his own dark and terrifying tapestry. The chase was on, and the world waited with bated breath, hoping to catch the Weaver before he could add another grim stitch to his monstrous masterpiece. The revelation of Julian Thorne as the primary suspect in the Obsidian Weaver murders sent shockwaves across the nation. The public, initially relieved to finally have a face to the terror, was quickly gripped by a new wave of fear mixed with morbid fascination. How could a seemingly ordinary, albeit reclusive, man be responsible for such a meticulously planned and brutal series of killings? The media's coverage became an obsessive deep dive into Thorne's life, his background, his every perceived eccentricity. The pressure on the task force, while shifted from who to where, remained immense. The hunt for Julian Thorne became the largest manhunt in modern American history, with every agency, from the FBI to local police, mobilized. Special Agent Eleanor Vance and Detective Robert Maxwell, despite the breakthrough, felt a chilling sense of urgency. They knew Thorne was highly intelligent, resourceful, and likely aware that law enforcement was closing in. He would not go down without a fight, or, more likely, he would vanish entirely, leaving them in a perpetual state of pursuit. The hunt became a race against time, not just to apprehend him, but to understand the profound, twisted logic behind his actions. Their first lead on Thorne's current whereabouts came from a tip from a former colleague in a remote construction firm in Montana. Thorne, it turned out, had recently taken a short-term contract job building a specialized research outpost in a secluded mountain range. His employers described him as quiet, efficient, and exceptionally skilled, but also aloof, keeping to himself. The location was incredibly remote, accessible only by a single, winding dirt road, and known for its harsh, unforgiving terrain. It was the perfect place for a man like Thorne to disappear. A specialized tactical unit, along with Vance and Maxwell, was dispatched to Montana. The approach to the outpost was arduous, requiring careful navigation through dense forests and steep, rocky inclines. As they closed in, the sense of dread grew palpable. They knew they were not just approaching a suspect. They were confronting the architect of a national nightmare. Upon reaching the outpost, they found it deserted. The small, prefabricated structures were empty, devoid of any personal effects that might belong to Thorne. However, a meticulous search revealed something far more disturbing. In one of the main research modules, tucked away beneath a loose floorboard, they discovered a hidden compartment. Inside, neatly organized, were a series of journals. These journals, written in Thorne's precise, almost calligraphic hand, were not mere diaries. They were manifestos. They detailed his philosophical journey, his profound disillusionment with humanity, and his developing belief that society was a tangled, decaying tapestry devoid of true meaning or purpose. He wrote of his perceived duty to reweave this tapestry, to prune the rotting threads, and to replace them with the obsidian truth of controlled chaos. His victims, he explained, were chosen not randomly, but specifically for what they represented. Sarah, the architect, symbolized the false promise of societal construction. Thomas, the historian, represented the burden of a meaningless past. Maria, the artist, embodied the frivolous illusion of creativity. And Dr. Thorne, the astrophysicist, epitomized humanity's misguided search for ultimate truth outside of itself. He saw them as vital, yet ultimately decorative, threads that needed to be cut to reveal the true, dark patterns beneath. The black silk thread, he explained, was his signature, his personal mark of creation, a symbol of his obsidian truth, woven into the fabric of his victim's demise. He truly believes he's performing a public service, Vance murmured, her face pale as she read an excerpt aloud. I am the weaver, and I alone see the patterns. I alone have the courage to unravel the meaningless and rethread it with purpose. Each life taken is a stitch in my grand design, a testament to the ultimate control over the illusion of choice. Maxwell, grim-faced, flipped through the pages. This isn't just a killer, Eleanor. This is a prophet of his own twisted religion. The journals also contained highly detailed plans for future victims, including names, routines, and potential methods of entry. This was the most chilling discovery. Thorne had not only documented his past actions, but had laid out his future designs. The task force immediately activated protections for the potential targets, a grim race to secure them before Thorne could make his next stitch. The Montana outpost was also Thorne's workshop. They found specialized tools, advanced climbing gear, and a small, but incredibly sophisticated silk weaving loom. It was here that he produced the unique black silk threads, custom-dyed and meticulously woven by his own hands, a ritualistic act that underscored his self-proclaimed role as the weaver. He had been creating his own signature quite literally from scratch. While the journals provided unprecedented insight into Thorne's mind, they offered no clue to his immediate whereabouts. The area was vast and wild, and Thorne, with his climbing skills and survival knowledge, could have disappeared into the wilderness indefinitely. The search expanded, now encompassing the rugged mountains and dense forests, a painstaking grid search of an unforgiving landscape. Days turned into agonizing nights. The public clamored for his capture. The potential victims lived in terror. Vance and Maxwell worked round the clock, poring over every word in the journals, searching for any subtle clue, any deviation from his meticulous planning that might betray his current location or his next move. A faint anomaly in one of his later journal entries caught Vance's eye. Amidst the philosophical ramblings and macabre plans, Thorne had meticulously sketched a series of intricate astronomical charts, not just generic ones, but specific to a particular celestial event, a rare alignment of Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars, occurring in precisely 1 week. Beneath the charts, in a smaller, almost wistful script, he had written, "The grand design reveals itself in the heavens, a true tapestry woven by forces beyond our comprehension. I must witness its purity, its perfect order, at the highest point." Vance's mind raced. Dr. Eris Thorne, the astrophysicist, had been obsessed with celestial mechanics. Could this be a connection? Was Thorne planning to witness this astronomical event at a location significant to his grand design? And what was the highest point? Maxwell, following Vance's lead, quickly cross-referenced known observatories, high-altitude research stations, and remote mountain peaks that would offer an unobstructed view of the specific celestial alignment. One location stood out: an abandoned astronomical observatory nestled atop Mount Cinder, a dormant volcano in central Oregon. It was remote, derelict, and known for its panoramic views of the night sky. Crucially, its last active astronomer, a reclusive academic, had been a personal acquaintance of Dr. Eris Thorne, the fourth victim, years ago. The connection was tenuous yet terrifyingly plausible. Thorne had integrated a personal detail of one of his victims into his own twisted pilgrimage. It was a pilgrimage, Vance realized, not just a hiding place. He was going to witness this celestial event, his grand design, and perhaps make his final, most significant stitch. A new tactical team, augmented by Vance and Maxwell, was immediately deployed to Oregon. The ascent of Mount Cinder was perilous, the air thin and biting. As they neared the summit, the decaying structure of the observatory emerged from the mist, an eerie sentinel against the vast sky. The celestial alignment was due to occur in a matter of hours. They found Julian Thorne inside the dilapidated dome, standing before the remains of a massive, long-defunct telescope. He was dressed meticulously, his black clothing almost blending into the shadows. In his hand, he held a long, thin blade, almost surgical in its precision. He was not aggressive, not defiant, but rather eerily calm, his eyes fixed on the gathering stars outside the dome's aperture. He was, as Vance had predicted, the artist contemplating his masterpiece. "I knew you would come," Thorne stated, his voice devoid of emotion, a mere whisper in the vast space. "The threads of fate, they are so predictable, aren't they? You chase the physical, but you fail to grasp the cosmic." Maxwell, ever cautious, tried to engage him. "It's over, Julian. There's no more weaving. You've been found." Thorne turned, a faint, almost pitying smile on his lips. "Found? No, detective. I allowed myself to be understood. You have only glimpsed a fraction of the pattern. The true tapestry, it transcends your petty laws, your fleeting lives." He gestured with the blade towards the night sky. "Tonight, the universe aligns. My greatest work, my final stitch, will be revealed." Vance, recognizing the deep psychological chasm, tried to appeal to his intellect. Your work is not a design, Julian. It's destruction. You've brought unimaginable pain. There's no beauty in that. Thorn chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Pain is a catalyst, Agent Vance. It's the chisel that reveals the true form. You call it destruction. I call it revelation. The unraveling had to happen for the new pattern to emerge. As the tactical team slowly advanced, Thorn suddenly moved, not towards them, but towards the edge of the observatory's viewing platform, a sheer drop of hundreds of feet. He held the blade aloft, catching the faint starlight. The ultimate control, he whispered, almost to himself, his eyes wide with a disturbing euphoria. To choose the final thread, my own. Before anyone could react, Thorn plunged the blade into his own heart, mimicking the precise wound he had inflicted upon his victims. He collapsed, his body teetering on the edge of the precipice, and then, with a final, almost poetic sigh, he toppled over, disappearing into the black abyss of the mountain. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the whistling wind. Julian Thorn, the Obsidian Weaver, had woven his final stitch, choosing his own end, denying justice in a court of law, but affirming his twisted philosophy to the very last breath. The aftermath was a whirlwind. The world grappled with the shocking suicide, the details of Thorn's journals, and the terrifying depths of his twisted ideology. The investigation concluded, but the questions lingered. Could he have been stopped earlier? What truly drove such a brilliant mind to such horrific acts? The discovery of his journals allowed Vance and Maxwell to understand his motive, his intricate pattern, but it did not, and could not, bring back the lives he had so cruelly extinguished. The fear across America slowly began to subside, replaced by a lingering sense of unease. The Obsidian Weaver had been stopped, but his shadow remained, a stark reminder of the fragile threads that hold society together and the darkness that can lurk beneath the most ordinary exteriors. His macabre tapestry, woven with the lives of the innocent and signed with the chilling black silk thread, would forever serve as a disturbing testament to a meticulous evil that had shaken a nation to its very core, an unforgettable chapter in the annals of true crime, leaving an indelible mark on the American psyche, a chilling reminder that sometimes the most dangerous monsters are the ones who believe they are creating beauty. The Weaver had unraveled, but the fear he had woven would forever remain a dark stain on the collective memory.